Before we begin, spoiler warning, I'm going to talk about stuff all the way to Dawntrail patch 7.25, including optional side content, as if that wasn't obvious from the title, so go away if you wish to remain pure and unburdened by my ramblings. That is all. Hello listener. After not receiving one in Endwalker, we are finally getting a new field operation, and my excitement, it's too much for me to bear. So I channeled all that energy into making this video, very slowly. I felt the need to create this little time capsule of my thoughts, observations, and general speculations about the Occult Crescent before we actually sail into Shades Triangle for ourselves on May 27th. First things first, this will serve kind of a pro-limer. This will serve as a lore primer, okay, I can speak, for the historical context surrounding the new content. We will primarily be covering the 5th Astral Era, which is a period of Hydaelyn's history I find deeply fascinating. If you wish to know more about this era, there are countless others online who have covered all the topics I'm going to discuss in much greater detail, and I implore you to seek them out. But I digress. Let's begin some occult observations. So, after the etheric freezing of the world had ended, the remaining peoples began to find their stride and migrate all over the place. And so began the 5th Astral Era, a period of great faith and learning, with various forms of spellcraft and magic taken to their apex as the forefront of progress. However, this era was far from utopic. There were countless skirmishes and conflicts between the many newfound and quite unstable cities, which eventually escalated into what we call the War of the Magi, the war which would lead the world again to ruin and bring forth the great flood of water, the 6th umbral calamity. Much like the others we will be covering, the city of Amdapor was a key player in the War of the Magi. They were the ones responsible for white magic today, and before that, the masters of creating soulkin, basically golems brought to life with specific elemental ether. We'll come back to this concept later on. From this first look at the Occult Crescent, we immediately see lots of distinctly Amdapori architectural features that I will now give direct comparisons for. Get used to it. There's going to be lots of visual comparisons made just like this throughout the video. The detailed diamond pattern on the pillars of the pavilion, the brickwork making up the majority of the structures, the domes on the background, the simple diamond pattern on the domes and pavilion, the detailing on the spire of the pavilion, and the tower peak's distinct shapes. There are a couple other things I want to bring up in this frame, but we'll come back to it in a later section. As Amdapor was seen as somewhat diplomatic, having assisted some of their smaller neighbours, respecting the boundaries of the elementals, some might be inclined to presume the development of white magic was a happy accident, or maybe a side product of their already existing golemancy, but that would be false. For there was a presence which primarily forced them to react and adapt. The city of Mhach, by most historical accounts, was a pretty rude city-state. Let's just put that out there. They eventually grew into a horrifying powerhouse that threatened all those around them. They kind of sought to expand their borders well beyond into the surrounding contemporary cities by means of just invading them or really elaborate underhanded schemes. Basically for them, anything goes, the ends would justify the means. Mhach is well known today for being the birthplace of black magic, the same that thaumaturges would use today. They also developed methods to commune with and subjugate the entities from the void, aptly named Voidsen. Nice job, guys. Exploiting them as manpower for their armies or batteries for their grand projects. and they undertook some grand projects. I'm not going to mention them here, but oh boy they did. But alas, looking to the Occult Crescent again, Mhach's influence is very clearly present, with its signature structures we've seen before. Firstly, that's a pyramid. It doesn't quite directly match the one from the Weeping City, but everything else is very familiar. Secondly, the lines of what look like residential housing, strikingly similar to that which we see in the Dunscaith Alliance raid. And lastly, this stonework building is a one-to-one of what can be seen in the Weeping City of Mhach, once again reinforcing to us that we are indeed dealing with the same people who made Ozma, or at least recreated him. I'm not going to go on a tangent about Eureka lore, I would really like to, but I am resisting the very urge to. I love Ozma, he is the most beautiful thing we have ever come across in this whole game. I love him. Putting the Mhach stuff aside for a moment, there is more to cover elsewhere, for if we sail westward of Mhach's homeland of Yefame, across the Strait of Melthor, we shall reach a small island continent of Vilbrand, and in the peak of the 5th Astral Era, you were bound to have a maritime with what you discovered there. Ooh, that was bad. Here we see the wild Lalafell, walking Popotos whom sailed from lands afar to Vilbrand after the 5th Umbral Calamity of Ice had abided. Seeking to settle a new home and make trade with all they could in these new lands, they swiftly made good relations with the local kobolds and slowly developed their floating city. Nym is our third major player in the War of the Magi. It's from them we get the arts of Arcanism and what they would later specialize into Skalla, using tactical stratagems and summoning fairy familiars. In tandem with their marauder comrades, Nym's forces were dubbed the Royal Marines, controlling the seas and leveraging their knowledge and strategies in times of conflict. Not as grand as Amdapori or Mhachi militaries, but they are instantly cooler because they have their own title, baby. However, as much as they were prosperous in terms of trade and cool magical floating city and all, it wasn't all great for the Nymians. Mhach would strike them a really cruel and horrific blow with the Green Death. Using a unique void scent named Bitoso, Mhach had this void scent covertly infiltrate the Nymian population through a deceptive multi-stage plot to spread the plague that it harbored. I won't give you the details, but my god, this was horrible. The effects of the plague are quite horrendous. The outcome for those who survived it was to live as a creature known as a Tonberry. So next time you enter the Wanderer's Palace dungeon, just know all those Tonberries we encounter were actually the victims of a plague who had been abandoned inside the temple complex during a last resort quarantine measure. Wow, isn't that beautiful, heartwarming lore? And guess what? There are quite a few comparisons in the Occult Crescent that can be made directly to the Nymians, covering multiple screenshots that we've seen. So I'm going to hit as many of these as I can in this one section. A structure almost identical to the Wanderer's Palace, the giant black gears used in Nymian waterworks, the tall arch details, the glowing light under archways, the larger simple archway, artificial waterfalls and other water-based fixtures, the archway with an embellished peak, this specific stonework pattern, these plant pots, these interior pillars, these exterior pillars, and this beautiful little Tonberry friend wearing distinctly red robes and no hat. We'll come back to them later. Oh, we will.
Fledgling cities emerged around the 300th year of the 5th Astral Era, and for the next 2.5 centuries, the number of city-states would grow to 12, each paying tribute to a unique god or goddess of the Eorzean pantheon. By the 1000th year of the 5th Astral Era, the realm's sovereign nations numbered 6.
So far, I've given a basic outline of the 3 most prominent of those 12 potential nations. We know nothing about the majority of the city-states from the 5th Astral Era. As a period filled with instability and conflicts beyond counting, vast swaths of history was just lost, or never put to page for all we know. We don't know the names of these sovereign peoples, nor their patron deity. Just forgotten grains of sand, all lost to time. Except for one. The real reason I wanted to make this video. The absolute underdog and surprise visitor of this whole story is Skalla, the 4th city-state that we know existed during the 5th Astral Era. Unlike the big three, we know much less about Skalla, even more so because their city has mingled messily with relatively recent Alamegan history. However, I'm going to cover as much information as I know and how it could possibly tie into the Occult Crescent. But, starting at the beginning, Skalla was founded at the dawn of the 5th Astral Era in Girabania, where we would find Alamigo today. Over hundreds of years, the people there built a grand city of stone, nestled in a steep ravine. This added an environmental layer of protection from outside invasion. However, it is written in the Encyclopedia Eorzea. Even this natural defense could not protect Skalla from destruction during a terrible age of war. When the great flood of the 6th Umbral Calamity later swept across the realm, the hollow ruins of the city were lost to sight, its remnants submerged beneath a raging sea. To me at least, this passage is implying that Skalla was already destroyed before the 6th Umbral Calamity, during the War of the Magi, likely making it one of the 6 city-states that were lost by the 1000th year of the 5th Astral Era. And that's about it. No, really. There's no patron god, no known unique spellcasting arts passed down through the ages, no individuals of note or culture really, just a ruined city at the bottom of a now very salty ravine. So, what physical evidence do we have that ties Skalla to the Occult Crescent? Well, when I watched the full live letter, after the live broadcast had already aired, eventually we see Yoshi P zone in to show us some Occult Crescent gameplay, and we see this underground chamber during the entry cutscene. And immediately, my mental doorbell was ringing, but I clearly wasn't home at the time. I couldn't place where I'd seen this before. About a couple weeks later, I'd gotten the Drowned City of Skalla dungeon in a roulette randomly, where I saw this. Those pillars are exactly the same. And then I kept looking around the dungeon. The more similarities just kept popping up. The elaborate doorway in the background, the many stacking curved arch designs on the back wall, even the fencing posts on this arena, it's all from the Drowned City of Skalla. Going even further into the footage of the trailer, we start to see this clean single file crisscross pattern all over what I assume is the Forked Tower, and even in the first base camp crystal. Which begs the question, what does this all mean? From my view, this is illustrating two things. Firstly, perhaps Skalla had a far greater role during the 5th Astral Era than our modern accounts suggest. They had a large city nestled in a well-defended position built over hundreds of years, and they simply fell to a war we truly don't even know the inciting incident for. Maybe there's motives and context behind Skalla's downfall that we are currently unaware of. And secondly, we're very likely getting a peek behind the curtain of history here, being granted access to a preserved region devoted to potentially all of the players from the 5th Astral Era, not just the prominent factions. Remember that there were at some point 12 city-states? There could be more unique places on this island made by people long forgotten that we don't even know about yet, or further details pertaining to cities we already know exist. we still have a whole other zone of this field operation to come in 7.5. The things in store for us have me so excited because it's history that's currently very scattered throughout all of 14 that goes all the way back to A Realm Reborn. And I'm doubting we'll get the whole story of this era, but I have no doubts that we will have some greater insights on the 5th Astral Era. And speaking of insights... let's finally talk about the Tonberry in the room. Further on in the trailer, we see our Warrior of Light and Ketenram in this distinctly Nymian chamber, where a tomb is opened to reveal a shadowy presence within. I am 99% sure that this is our red-robed Tonberry friend from earlier in the trailer. It should also be noted that if this little fellow is a Nymian Lalafell, as their stature, environment, and general Tonberryness suggests, their red robes could be identifying that they were a high mage of their time, similar to the Tonberry King in the Wanderer's Palace. I'm hoping that this kind of dark and malicious presentation is played for comedy in the cutscene, honestly, and I love that we're getting another 5th Astral Era Tonberry NPC. I'm going to speculate and proclaim them as our central pillar of narrative progression on this island, learning about the nature of the Occult Crescent, similarly to what Kryl is to Eureka, or Mikoto for Bozja, and we'll find out what perils we might uncover there. Next order of business, I just want to blast off a few random theories as food for thought that will inevitably date this video even more. For context, I've never played or experienced Final Fantasy V, so this is from my limited scope of only knowing Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. The Occult Crescent is somehow directly tied to the War of the Magi. I know, it's an out there theory, but bear with me for a second. We've seen lots of structures belonging to various peoples who were historically in conflict with one another, up until they knew of the oncoming flood, that is. But from what we've seen, there is limited evidence of outright destruction here, implying to me harmony and cooperation among the inhabitants. Some of the new bosses even look like a synthesis of multiple city-states combining their magical knowledge. It could be that the islands were somehow teleported to a completely different location maybe, or sent through time. That could explain why the Crescent Island is so far away from Eorzea, where all of these civilizations historically were, and it could be that this event maybe sparked the War of the Magi. As mass confusion ensued, and nobody knew what had happened to the previously known Occult Crescent just up and vanishing, maybe everyone just started warring at each other because nobody knew what was going on. The reason I currently don't believe that the Occult Crescent was established after the War of the Magi, during that period of pre-Calamity Peace, is because Skalla was likely already dead by that point. And yet we see a whole chamber devoted to Skallan architecture in the South Horn entry cutscene, which wouldn't make sense to be there if by the time this place was built, their makers were already crushed in the War of the Magi. Number 2. The Occult Crescent is actually all some kind of illusion. I've not much to add or explain with this one really. This thought just entered my head due to our new action system being tied to phantom jobs, and the new relic weapons being called phantom weapons, giving us the impression that this location and the things within are actually somehow spectral in nature or fabricated by some means. The other reading you could take from this, however, is that the Occult Crescent is a phantom of the past that has anomalous properties, allowing it to linger all the way to the present. However you wish to see it, we will see. And number 3. Our beloved Tonberry is wholly or partly responsible for the Occult Crescent's preservation. My reasoning for this is because of the bubbles in the sky. We know that the mages of Nym used quite large-scale water magics to entomb the Wanderer's Palace and contain the infected therein. And said ward was only broken well over 1500 years later. It took Bahamut's rage upon the land and decades of kobold mining in the surrounding area to finally free the Wanderer's Palace, leading me to speculate that these floating translucent orbs are large water-aspected wards conjured by Nemean mages, which have preserved the island. And who is the only inhabitant we have seen thus far? A former High Mage of Nym. Right, and with that, I'm going to call it here. This is the first video I've ever written, and the only one I plan to. I put this all together in Microsoft Clipchamp, and the ever-dwindling performance of this software has made it ever so much harder to realise the full script. There were so many little things I wanted to comment on and speculate about, especially with the bounty of extra screenshots to cover, but alas, my efforts to keep the scope of the script on topic and manageable was a trying task, to say the least. With my limited experience and time afforded to me before the Occult Crescent drops, this will have to do. If I find I can add anything meaningful to the conversation post this content releasing, who knows, maybe I'll ramble upon the page again. But for now, take care, and thank you for listening.